Hey guys, tonight I want to talk about making a sleeve for your quilt. The show requires a 4-inch sleeve be attached to the back of your quilt, no matter what size it is. Even small quilts, we want that sleeve on there. And it's important that this sleeve not just be flat up against the quilt. The reason is when you have a sleeve that is flat against the quilt and you slide a pole through that sleeve, it's going to cause the quilt to curl over the pole. So there's a way to make a sleeve where you have the back sides a little bit smaller than the front, so it makes kind of a little curve in that sleeve, and that makes a perfect way for the pole to fit in. So let's look at it and learn how to make one. All right, this is a quilt that I'm going to be putting a sleeve on, and I want it to be 4 inches, as we talked about. So it's going to fit 4 inches on this back right in here. So we want the sleeve to be at least the width of this quilt or just in just a little bit. Some people make their sleeves really short, and what happens, especially on big quilts, is the sleeve is holding right there, but then the rest of the quilt falls down like that, and it's not going to look good. So I'm going to encourage you to make the sleeve the full width of the quilt. So the first thing we want to do is cut our strip for the sleeve. Because it's going to be 4 inches, we're going to double it, so that's 8 inches, and then we need our seam allowance, so that means we need to cut this strip of fabric to be 8.5 inches. Now, I know a lot of us don't have 8.5 inch rulers, so let's talk about a couple of different ways that we can cut that strip. All right, the first thing I did here was put a straight line here and a perpendicular line here. Just used my ruler and lined up those two cuts. Now I can use my mat if I want to, just by taking these two edges and lining them up and making sure that they're following along one of those lines. I can count up 8.5 inches and make my cut straight across. We're not going to worry about this edge being funky right now. It may not be completely accurate. You may have some little variations in it, but that shouldn't really matter with making this sleeve. If it's off just a little bit, it's not going to matter. But the other way to do it is to use a second ruler. You can use a square ruler, you can use another long ruler, whatever you have. But in this case, my main ruler is 6.5 inches. And so I know that I need 2.5 more inches before I make that cut. So if I take this square ruler and I line up my 2-inch mark right here along this edge, and then I take this ruler and I line it up along there like that. As long as it's straight, and just to tell you, I try to line up the numbers here so that I can see that they are straight all the way across. So I'm going to take that. I can take this ruler off now and can just put my hand down here and cut. And now I have that 8.5 inch strip right here. So the next step is going to be to make the sleeve the right length. There's several ways we can do it. You obviously can measure and cut if, measure along here and then cut if you want to. One of the easiest things to do is just to line it up along the edge of the quilt. Remember, we want it to be just inside the edge of this quilt is where we want the sleeve to end, and we're going to be turning under some edges, so if we line it up even with the quilt, then we should be able to make it fit just perfectly. So I'm going to take my ruler and put it along here. Now I'm not going to cut with it sitting there because I will invariably cut the binding off, so we're going to move this out of the way and make our cut. So now I have my sleeve ready to go. So now we're ready to do some sewing on this sleeve. The first thing we're going to do is turn under these edges right here because we don't want this raw edge sticking out. So we're going to turn under about 1/4 inch and press it in place. And then we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to turn it over one more time, just using that fold that we just made. We're just going to press it down. So that gives us a completely enclosed edge there. We'll do the same thing on the other side. 1/4 inch in, press it in place. Another 1/4 inch over, press it in place. Now I'm going to take this to the machine and sew a line just along here and here. I'll be back. So I have this sewn down now. This raw edge is completely encased, and these are going to be the ends of our sleeve. The next step is to take the fabric, and we've got it again laying face side down like this. So this is the back of the fabric we're looking at. And we're going to fold it over till it's about halfway in there, somewhere along those lines, about halfway. And we're going to iron it in place like this. Then we're going to take the other side and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to meet that fabric that we just ironed, and we're going to iron it in place as well. And I know you're saying, but those two ends don't meet. No, but they'll be close enough. We're not going to worry about them. So now that we have this done, we're going to turn it over. And this is a step that I have added that I haven't seen anybody else do, but to me it makes it so much easier. I am going to baste this line up here. Now I've done it on the machine. You can certainly take the machine and machine baste it, but that's a whole lot of little stitches that you have to take out. You could hand baste it, but that's again just a lot of time to do. So I like to just take a very fine headed pin. So this pin has a very tiny head on it, and I'm just going to pin it in place along here, and I'm going to put in 6 or 7 pins on each side. So now let's turn it over back to here. The next step is to sew along here and to sew these two pieces together. And the way we're going to do that is just to pick them up both at the same time and fold it, open it like this. And this is where we're going to sew with our 1/4 inch seam. We're going to sew along here all the way across. Now look, we've got the back sides of the fabric together. Back sides together, front sides are out. So let me go sew that. So I have now sewn along this line right here, right there, and I'm just going to lay it down, and first thing I'm going to do is just finger press it open, just using my fingers along here and just pressing it down. And the reason we press it open is it's going to get rid of some of the bulk in there, so you don't have this huge bulky seam showing on the other side of your sleeve. Now let's take it with the iron and just hit it with that. And the reason I have put the pins in to hold this other seam is that if those aren't there, it's real hard to iron this without messing up that fold that we have there, and that's an important fold. So what has happened here is since we have taken this seam in the back, that means that the back is now 1/2 inch smaller than the front. So that means that we get this kind of D shape here. So that you have, it's flat here and it has a little bit of poof here. That little bit of poof is going to be the place that the rod is going to go. So that's going to make the quilt hang much, much smoother. So now we're ready to attach the sleeve to the quilt. Make sure that you're on the top of the quilt. That's something you don't want to have to deal with. And we're going to take this and just put it very close up here to the binding edge. And I like to pin it in place. At this stage you could just use these pins if you wanted to pin it in place, because those pins are holding the fold. So just take those pins out and pin it in place. So now we can pin it down at the bottom, and remember you've got this little poof here. We're not going to try to make that flat. We want that to stay there. So we're going to go and we're going to be sewing on this folded edge that we've already put on. So let me pin that down as well. So now the sleeve is ready to be stitched down. I do this by hand and using just a basic applique stitch or a basic blind stitch to hold it in place. Personally, I like starting somewhere down in here when I'm doing my stitching. I started one right here before and the knot came loose and the sleeve started unraveling off, and so I've kind of learned not to do that. But I like to start somewhere in here, and when I'm working on these edges I'm only going to be stitching down that bottom layer. So this top layer is going to stay up for my sleeve. I'm going to stitch, start in here, I'm going to stitch along here, I'm going to stitch all the way along here. When I get to this side over here, same thing, I'm just going to stitch that area right there, and I would encourage you to put 2 or 3 extra stitches in those 2 corners right there as you're getting to those, just to hold it in place a little more. You're going to come down here and then across here and then back up to where you started. When you finish that, you're going to have this wonderful sleeve that is going to let your quilt hang just beautifully.